But before we get into the Q&A, we thought it might be kind of fun for each of us just to give a little update about some of the work we're doing. So for Anny and Michael, that'll be about conservation. And for me, I'll talk about painting. And since this is, of course, all about trying out new materials and techniques, I thought I'd share with you guys a couple new materials I've been experimenting with. So if we go to the next slide. So I do landscape paintings, kind of like semi-abstract, semi-impressionistic. And in part, I love doing landscape paintings because I'm a big believer in the kind of grounding and healing power of nature. So it's all about like advocating nature. The problem with that a little bit is that art materials are not always the most eco-friendly. So I'm starting to experiment with how I can be a little bit more eco-friendly, with my art materials. One thing that I think is often a trouble spot is just for people in terms of their own personal health, and I think perhaps as well a little bit for the planet, is paint cleaner. So, in the past people used turpentine. Maybe some people still do, but most people I know at least use Turpenoid. Turpenoid is great for cleaning brushes, and it's not ideal for your health. I've also used Murphy's oil soap, which is great for your health, but not great for actually like cleaning your brushes. So I recently purchased this EcoSolve, just saw it online, and it's actually worked out really well. It's made from soybeans. They found a way for it to actually like dry, and it's extremely well at cleaning my brushes, has a very mild smell. Like with Turpenoid, I kind of keep the lid on it, so I can't really tell you what it's like to have this thing, fully out in the open or something. And the Amazon reviews I read, people seem to really enjoy it as well. And they said it's pretty strong. So just if you do decide to try this out, just know it is not Turpenoid. So, always expect maybe the unexpected, right? Like it might be a little bit stronger than a normal kind of Turpenoid. This is made from soybeans. So it may not be the most ideal thing in terms of the environment. There's a lot of, deforestation that occurs from soybean farming. I have no idea where these soybeans are coming from, but it's the kind of thing where I think I'm always interested in trying kind of eco-friendly products, at the very least, just to like let the market know that people are interested in these things. And even if it isn't perfect, it's maybe a step closer. And it's just, I think it's exciting and interesting to, try out new things as you go and see what might work better and what might not. So Anny and Michael, do you guys have any thoughts about the EcoSolve paint thinner? I know you haven't used it. I was just talking to you guys about it. So for instance, have you ever heard of soybeans being used as a paint thinner before?
I have never used it.
Yeah.
Really, but I can see some benefits, as you said. If you are working in a small space, as Michael said, it would be friendlier if you don't have good ventilation to work with other materials like turpentine. So yeah, I would try it.
Yeah, it's been working out pretty well so far. I did a thin, I've done some thin glazes with it too, and that seems to work well, and it seems to dry in about a day.
It'd be interesting to test the different properties of the materials, and we're lucky here at MoMA, we have a conservation science department, so we could actually take these products to them and get them evaluated and see how they compare to more traditional materials. So that's something we could think about doing. It's great to have also the actual artist hand using them to see how they perform, just in terms of mixing qualities. It sounds like they have good properties that way.
Yeah, I feel like this has been a real win for me. And again, it's like, I think you might have brought up the good point about the soybeans, is like, you don't know, farming has its own ecological issues, but I think it is probably much healthier for me. Especially since during the pandemic, I lost my studio. So now I'm like painting in my apartment. So, I think we all have, and regardless, you don't want to be breathing in harmful vapors. So I have one other thing I'll share, which is I tried some eco-friendly gesso. Thank you. So you can see that in the slide. This was just another thing I saw. I just thought I'd give it a try. So I don't know what kind of gesso I use. I'm looking over to see if I can find it, but I use standard gesso you'd find from an art supply store. I believe it's made with like plastic chemicals, so that when I'm rinsing my brushes with the gesso, if I use the sink, they're going right down the drain. So I'm trying to think of, being mindful of like letting microplastics, as the term has come to be known, from just kind of like leaching into our water system. So I thought, I wonder if there's something else I could try. So this particular type of gesso, it came in a box, a couple bags with like powder. One of them is a whitening agent, and then the other one is a plant binder called methyl cellulose. And this took several days to make it, because you have to add water and you mix them together. So basically, it took one day to make the methyl cellulose. I just added water to that, let it sit overnight. The next day, I primed my wood panel, which is what I paint on, birch wood panels. And I primed it with methyl cellulose, which was part of the instructions. And then on the third day, I mixed the whitening agent with the methyl cellulose and some more water. So it's kind of a multi-step, like 3-day process. The whitening powder is made with French marble dust, limestone powder, and titanium dioxide pigment. And I believe Michael and Anny suggested, I told them about this, and they're like, ooh, you might want to, like, wear a mask, be a little careful, because you don't want to inhale that kind of dust. So I went outside. I had, fortunately, we all have N95 or, similar masks these days. So I went outside with my mask and mixed it all up. And then I primed the canvas. So if you go to the next slide, on the left-hand side, these aren't great photos, sorry about that, but you'll see that's the wood, birch wood panel that I have that's kind of hovering off that sheet of plastic. That's the gesso I mixed up. And I'd already primed it with the methyl cellulose, and then I added the gesso. On the right, it's a little abstract to see, but that's the wood panel with the gesso on it. And unfortunately, it didn't go super well. So you might notice some weird little gray lines. Those are like cracks that all formed immediately after the gesso dried. And I thought I followed the instructions really well. I went back and checked. So I did my best, but I may have screwed something up. I'm not really sure what happened. So this experiment didn't go as well. I could potentially give it another try and see if it works out. But I might be like looking for other alternatives. So I don't know, Michael and Anny, if you have any thoughts about like rabbit skin glue or the experiment I had, or what other, like, for instance, it seems like I could just prime the whole thing with methyl cellulose, which is a clear fluid, and I wouldn't even need the white if I didn't want it. Is that true?
You want something to absorb the paint, right? So I think just the methyl cellulose, I don't know if it would work. The other thing I was wondering if you use too much water.
Yeah, I did something wrong. So.
But I think it's definitely worth experimenting till you get the consistency you want and see what happens.
Yeah. It was, I think I applied it a little thicker than maybe I should have. And there's like a little part where it kind of brushed up, but I was pretty surprised by the cracking.
And it happened pretty quickly after you applied it?
Yeah, very quickly. Okay.
Yeah, the proportions must be off somehow. I guess that's part of the pros and cons of using a material like this, where you're combining things and it's not commercially mixed. So you're going to have general, unevenness in that kind of recipe, I would say. So it probably is worth, playing around with the proportions some more if you like the other qualities of the material. I was curious, Alex, so when you mix it up, does it stay pretty wet for the next day or something, or does it solidify in right away?
It was actually, I thought it was drying even a little faster than normal gesso, which is pretty quick.
Yeah.
Which is actually, I think why there's like not that it matters, but there's a little gray smudge in the bottom. And that was like, I was still finishing gessoing it and some was coming up.
Oh,
So I was like, gee, that's pretty fast.
yeah. I'd say it's drying too fast. So yeah, there's an issue with that. So you're getting these kind of drying cracks that
Yeah.
you typically see in paintings.
And do you guys have any thoughts about, for me, it was a bit of a hassle and it's kind of 3 days and this mixed result. And I'm like, I don't know. I think I'm going to go try other things. Do you know if artists still use rabbit skin glue? Is that a kind of a durable primer, or do you have any other thoughts about priming?
But rabbit skin glue has been used forever. So yeah, it's a good material and that's what you want to do. Seals your panel, you can mix your gesso with it. So yeah, I would
Yeah,
try.
that could be my next experiment. We'll see. I was also thinking there might be ways to just deal with the gesso I have too in a way where I'm not washing it down the sink, or I don't know. I think there's a lot to explore with that. And then I see, I think that was Margaret. It disappeared, but it says rabbit skin glue is easy to use. So thank you for the encouragement. And I hope this encourages everyone on the call to, if you're like me, you're a creature of habit, you do the same thing over and over. So it's really fun to try different materials. And even though one of mine kind of didn't go so well, the other thing did. So, if you keep trying things, you keep getting all these new skills and all this new information, which I think is great. So anyway, I've talked plenty. Would you like to, Anny, share what you've been up to?
Sure. Next slide, please. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Elizabeth Murray, who I'm sure everybody knows. It's a well-known artist that painted in many styles, but she distinctively painted paintings that they look three-dimensional, and very often they're off the wall. And I chose to talk about two paintings, actually three in MoMA's collection. And the last one, I'm going to talk about a little treatment with it here in conservation. So if you want to go to the next slide. So this is the first painting that Elizabeth started to dismember per se. So this is called Painter's Progress, who she painted in '81. And in this painting, she basically took different shapes canvases and mounted them like typical stretchers, but shaped, and created almost like a puzzle in this. So the 19 panels installed like a puzzle, but they're very specific on how they have to be installed. And the installation gets a little tricky because you have to make a template to be able to install it with leaving the spaces that she chooses to leave. For example, in the top here, sort of triangle, she wants to leave a space that is very definite of how she wants this work to be installed in space. So yes, so next slide. This is about this work. It's fascinating to understand how Elizabeth starts developing these artworks that she does, that they're off the wall, they're three-dimensional. And she initiates by making these very complex drawings to decide on the shape she wants to create. And each shape is almost like it's a stretcher or a carving. So she starts with this drawings, and you can see here she changes the color, the dimensions, and for this painting called Do the Dance, she does several reiterations of drawings and colored pencils, and these happen to be in MoMA's collection in the drawings department. Next slide. And here's the painting, Do the Dance. So what's fascinating about this painting is that beside the little snake shape, the green one, and the one on the left that is orange, and the little guy up here They're all small panels that attach to each other. So she gives the drawing to her assistant, who typically she hires sculptors, and they carve these shaped stretchers. They're no longer stretchers like into the dance per se. They're actually little sculptures where then canvas is stretched on them separately, and then each shape is attached to another one with mending plates. So if we go to the next slide, might be able to illustrate better how she does it. So here we're just installing one. It goes very quickly, but you see it almost looks like a hive in the back. All the little panels and shapes are attached with mending plates. And here, and as you can see, they're very big and very heavy, and you have to be very careful when you move them because they tend to torque a little bit. On the right side, you can see how the shapes I made. You almost see here, I mean, you see here the tool marks by the assistant who's making the shapes, and then he covers them with canvas, and then they get attached somehow. In this case, this shape happened to be one shape that it was not attached to the others, as you can see on your left side while they're installing this. If we can run the video again, you can, if possible, you can see how the shapes are. It's hard to tell, but they're mending plates that attach the whole thing, except the ones that I told you in the periphery of the work. There you go. 8 men to move this work. So it's heavy, torquey, and very fragile. Next slide, please. So what I'd like to talk to you today is more about despair and about what Elizabeth says about some of her work. Second, something is covering my text. Okay. I'm gonna read it from here. I'm gonna quote Elizabeth with this one. Elizabeth says, I paint about the things that surround me, things that I pick up and handle every day. That's what art is. Art is an epiphany in a coffee cup. So it's a very personal way of describing and painting and creating her work. So this pair is now on view, and it's about 10 feet tall and has all these laces. So the next slide, please. Again, I'm going to show you backwards how she creates this work. In this one, it's a little bit more simplified in some ways, but she is trying to figure out how she's going to position the two pieces, because it's a diptych per se. It's a pair of shoes. It's called this pair. And how she's going to install them, and how ultimately she's going to decide on the shapes. They're like two balloons that almost project from the wall. And here you see one drawing already. Here it starts to look more like a shoe. In the blue one, even more. And already maybe deciding on the color. Here is blue. And here this is a drawing that's in Moma's collection, where she's playing with the laces of the shoes. Next slide, please. So before this work went on view in the second floor, we brought to conservation because it was in need in some treatment, for some treatment. And the other one, the thing that I want to point out to you is that how we are able to transport these works to conservation or store them. And they're suspended in these sort of travel frames. They're very cumbersome. There's also pads in the bottom for the weight. They're very heavy, and they're very fragile, and they don't stand on their own because they protrude from the walls. They want to come forward. So they always moved in these sort of travel frames, crates. They're stored and carried to the galleries like this, as I said before. And here we are in the conservation department, where we brought them for treatment. So the next slide. So one phenomenon that happens to the way she applied the paint is called efflorescence. And I don't know if you probably heard of the term. It happens also when you do brickwork and excess water get penetrated in the bricks. Then it appears this whitish sort of crystals on the bricks. And it's always usually easy just to brush them off. So in the case of despair of this work, it's not water, is the fatty acids that are in the oil. They migrate to the surface of the paintings, creating this sort of fuzzy, whitish efflorescence that almost, they're crystals, it's almost powder. And you can easily remove it by brushing it with a dry brush. Usually be pretty successful. So sometimes this efflorescence in this work, I mean, it happens, that has reoccurred. Not as bad as a few years ago when we treated it for the first time, but nevertheless, it was here for more treatment. So this is the one on your left is before treatment, and the one on the right is after treatment. So you can see the difference. Next slide, please. And here it is, this pair installed in gallery 202. So we treated it to be here. Next slide. And this is from the side, so you can see how it protrudes from the wall. It's in some areas is over 13 inches. And the installation of this work is complicated because they're very heavy, and there's just so many places you can lift it up from. So they're always complicated to install her works. And the next slide. Here, I just wanted to show you how dynamic Elizabeth is and the sizes of most of her works in her studio. They're usually extremely large, heavy, and cumbersome. So I had the great fortune and privilege to work with Elizabeth when she had her retrospective here at MoMA in 2005. Where then traveled to Valencia. Here's Elizabeth in Valencia with the former director of IBAM. And why, you wonder why a conservator is important to travel and to be involved in exhibitions, which we do constantly. And that's because in this, I'm just going to talk specifically about this exhibition. The works are large, they are cumbersome to install. We borrowed many works from different lenders, many private lenders. Elizabeth tended to gift works to a lot of her friends, so they were in private collections with friends, with other artists, like Jennifer Bartlett owned a few. So some of them, they couldn't come here to be treated. They all needed something. They were a little bit abandoned wherever they were. So my role in the show was partially to coordinate the restoration of a lot of the works that were coming to the show and hiring different conservators and getting the treatment reports and the proposals to get the paintings ready for the exhibition. So that was sort of a big task, but also working to Elizabeth, to going a lot to her studio and helping her also with treating some of the works that belong to her. And then of course, I was involved in the installation. As I told you before, it was very cumbersome, and I was just supervising the installation among other things. And then I traveled to Valencia with Elizabeth and the curators, and we took a whole team from MoMA, an art handler, registrar, in order to be able to support all the staff in Valencia to install this beautiful show. And of course, Elizabeth was there, and I interviewed her, and it's very special for me to have met her, to work with her. She's not only an extraordinary artist, but it's an extraordinary human, kind, and fantastic human being. So she's greatly missed. So that's all I want to say. If you have any questions, happy to answer. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Anny. Maybe Michael, should you share a little bit about what you're up to?
Sure. I'd like to talk to everybody about this new acquisition. This is a work by Malangatana Valente Nguyen, better known just by his first name, Malangatana, Cry for Freedom from 1973. Malangatana was a Mozambican artist. He lived until 2011. And this particular painting, large painting, 4 by 10 feet, is actually his response to the massacre of civilians in a small village by the Portuguese army. And this is a few years before Mozambique received independence from Portugal. You can see the iconography is very typical of this artist. All these interlocking and entwined figures. These are in this typical color range of very bright colors. And you can see figures mixed with animal motifs. And in particular, you see knives on the right side that allude to this conflict. And this is, again, very typical of his work. It also includes interesting detail on the left. It should be in the next slide. And here you see that Malangatana actually included a self-portrait in the painting. So this, I think, in some ways makes our painting unique. I wanted to share with you some of the details of how this painting arrived at MoMA. And in the next slide, here you can see the paintings installed in his former studio in Maputo. And that's Cry for Freedom there in the center, surrounded by other paintings from the 70s and later. And this is work that's actually taking place in preparation for the paintings to be exhibited here in the US. So the paintings were part of a survey of the first survey of the artist's work in the US at the Art Institute of Chicago. And this exhibition took place last year in 2020, pretty much virtually. But you can see this is a shot of the setup of the works being prepared for transit to the US. So the conservators from the Art Institute of Chicago actually went to Maputo, brought their whole kit of conservation supplies, and worked to stabilize the paintings in the studio before they were packed up and brought to Chicago for this exhibition. So part of this also involves some treatment of the works when they arrived in Chicago. And let's have the next slide. This is actually when it arrived at MoMA. So after the exhibition in Chicago closed, MoMA acquired Cry for Freedom. And this shows you here as it arrived. And in the next slide, one interesting detail I wanted to share with you is this kind of history of the painting that you realize when you look at the back of the painting. So this is the back of the masonite panel that he's used, and you can see it shows some signs of age, but it also includes these really interesting inscriptions. And we can see that it was included in Festac 77, which was the second World Black and African Festival of Arts and Culture held in Lagos. And that was a very important festival that brought together artists, poets, musicians from around the world in 1977. And Malangatana has also inscribed in red this tribute to two African revolutionaries who were helping to bring forward the plight of places like Mozambique that were still under colonial rule. In the next slide, here is a detail that was kindly given to us from the Art Institute conservators. So when they arrived in Chicago, they actually did some more work on the paintings, including cleaning them. And they cleaned our painting. So you can see here in this detail on the left, they've cleaned this, this half of the detail. So you can see, I think, quite clearly that they are removing the dirt that's stuck in the texture of the panel. And Malgantana quite typically would use the masonite panels with the textured side as his as the place he would paint on. So this is interesting because I think you can see, because of the texture of this masonite panel, it's really grabbed a lot of dirt. So you can see how well the cleaning is helping to reestablish the colors, and particularly in the lighter colors that are quite grimy. So the next slide, I think we have some more details. So again, you can see before treatment in the center, you can see there's little paint losses in the green, and also the overall, the painting is quite grimy. And then after treatment on the right, you can see how much more clearly the colors stand out, and with the little tiny losses of paint restored, it's much more legible in a way. So, and the next slide. So when it arrived at MoMA, we also noticed, we were inspecting the work to get it ready for possible acquisition, possible display rather. And we noticed some small paint losses again, like in the headdress of the women's kerchief here and in the face. So we realized that the painting still was a little unstable. So we brought it to the space where I'm in now to stabilize any of these small losses and restore them right before it went on view in April. So this involved actually using a conservation grade adhesive applied under magnification with a brush, and then gently heating the area so that the adhesive would be activated. And then using a kind of conservation grade gouache actually restored the areas of loss so they were not visually distracting. And there was also some other areas that were needed some more attention in terms of cleaning, some little accretions and things like that you'd expect to see on a painting this age that we also addressed. So while it wasn't as extensive as the treatment that was done in Chicago, it still was gratifying to prepare this work for display. And in the next slide, just some details I included of some of these tiny losses you can see in the figure at the left, and also some areas of cracking, but gives you an idea of how the texture of the panel support really shows through, almost like the texture of canvas. And he's painting kind of using lots of impasto in some areas, and other areas he's painting very thinly, almost like a watercolor. I think you can see in the figure on the left, in the arm, that's fairly transparent, where you can see the under colors of the other figure below coming through. And this is really, you have to see this painting in person because it really comes through amazingly in terms of the technique. It's hard to show in a reproduction. So speaking of that, I think in the next slide, here we are in MoMA's galleries. This is the painting shown here on the left with works by Benny Andrews on the right and Lottie Rosenfeld in the middle. So I hope to get the chance to come see this new acquisition as soon as you're able to. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Michael and Anny, and congratulations on all the amazing work. It's incredible just to see all the work that needs to keep having to happen, right, to make these works look just as beautiful as when they were made, or or as best as they can be made, given the conditions. We did have, feel free to share any questions you have about what Michael and Anny talked about, as well as any personal questions you have about your own art practice and about the course. We have a couple of questions here. This one is for Anny. Graham was asking, looking at Do the Dance, is there any reason she, I guess Elizabeth Murray, would not paint directly onto the wood and avoid the complication of attaching canvas? I think you're on mute, Anny.
Oh, I think she liked to paint on canvas because that's how she started painting. So she didn't want to abandon the canvas. But then again, she wanted to paint a different manner, dismember the paintings, get them together. So, but she still liked the texture of using canvas. So that's why she used canvas. And also receive the oil because she painted in bold colors and she liked sort of a creamy, thick texture when she painted. So the canvas was a better substrate to paint on for her. And it was prepared canvas.
Gotcha, great. And then one for Michael. Carol asks, how do you clean paintings like Malagatana's Cry for Freedom? And someone else also wrote, do you use steam or detergent?
So in this case, the painting is oil on masonite, or hardboard we call it. So the texture of the masonite makes it a challenge to clean evenly. So we typically use brushes to start with to get any accumulated dirt off. But yeah, and then depending on what tests we do, then we move to maybe using a very mild detergents, very cautiously applied, because different colors react differently to moisture. So it's really on a case-by-case basis, but we have doing tests under the microscope to determine the best approaches typically for these kind of things. And not every square inch of the paint is going to be the same. And you could see in some of the thicker paint, the white paints in particular needed extra attention because they really did attract more grime.
Right. Judith asked, just in general, can you teach us some basics for cleaning a painting? And I might just tag that with, yeah, do you have like, if you have an oil painting at home, is there like kind of one thing we should know if we wanted to wipe the dust off of it, or any suggestions?
Well, I don't know, Michael, but I would not attempt anything harsh. I would just suggest to keep the dust off with, if you can, just to have a soft brush where you can dust off the dust and the dirt a little bit. If you want to go further, I would recommend you get advice from somebody that's a professional, because sometimes you can clean something with a little moisture, but some colors you can clean and others you might not be able, because they will bleed color, for example, even if it's an oil paint. So I would just recommend that if you just want to keep the dust away, that's fine, using a soft brush.
Okay, great.
I would reiterate what Anny said, that even oil paint, dried oil paint, can be very moisture sensitive. So you want to avoid doing any kind of all over kind of use of moisture, because it could actually be quite damaging.
And then we have a question from Paul. How do you determine what to fix in a painting when in treatment? What if there are some intentionally faded strokes or details?
That's a good question. I mean, in terms of a painting done in the 70s, the materials have aged and some of the colors remain vibrant. I mean, that was certainly the case for this painting. We didn't see any evidence of fading or discoloration, but you do sometimes see that, and we tend to chalk that up to the normal aging of an artwork. It's only if there's like pieces missing that we would try to replicate them to make them less visually distracting. But we would typically accept that some amount of fading or discoloration may have occurred. And you can see the environment that the painting is held in can influence that. But that's also part of the history of the work. So, you know, the back of the Malagatana looks like has like really aged in a way that was surprising, but you know, again, it's stable. So we just accept it for what it is.
And Rachel had a related question, which I'm quite curious about too, is how do you know when there was a problem with the painting's colors and it's not the color the artist intended?
Well,
I'll let Anny do that one.
that's a complicated question. If you have excellent images of a painting that you can compare it with, can be helpful to know if the painting had faded somehow. But also we have methods of testing if the color of the paintings, and then later on we can know if they have faded by measuring. So that is the more accurate way, because sometimes people remember, oh, this was brighter. How brighter? I don't know how bright, but brighter. So that is very ambiguous. So we have ways of measuring color and then take another reading 5 years later or whenever and determine how much the color has faded. So if you want to keep your works, just make sure you don't expose them to too much light in your house. And if you have works on paper, to keep on rotating them so they're not exposed to too much light, because things tend to fade.
Yeah.
But not everything. Anyway.
So thank you all for the questions. Keep them coming. And if you have conservation or if you have personal painting practice questions, feel free to include them. We have one from Philippe. Can you please suggest a basic course about restoring paintings?
So that typically the training of a conservator is like a multi-year kind of endeavor involving, you know, study of chemistry and art history and studio art, depending on what, if for paintings at least. So the basic courses are really not really out there, I would say. It's really a profession that takes multiple years of coursework. So yeah, if I knew of the quick version, I'd be excited to tell you about it, but I think it's not something you can learn in a basic course, really.
I think today you don't have the apprenticeship kind of tradition that you used to have before. We have all these schools for conservation and more sophistication. So you used to apprentice with somebody, but that's rare today.
Gotcha. Pragya asked, is there a way to fix uneven coating of a varnish in a painting? You just have to take the varnish off. Is that the idea? And then apply a new one?
Sometimes artists apply the coatings uneven, and that's what they like, or they selectively varnish. So you have to just examine carefully the painting and know and see if the painting is original or not, and if it's even or not. You know, maybe that was the choice of the artist.
Okay, I'll go to another question. Peter asked, I'm new to painting and starting with acrylics. What minimum brush sizes should I use and what types and how many do I require? So I would say it really all depends on the size of the painting you're working with. And it depends on the style. It's really the kind of strategy you want to use. What I've done in the past is I've bought, like, sometimes you can just buy like an affordable kind of starter kit that has a little bit of everything, and in terms of the sizes of brushes, and then from there kind of buy like nicer ones, and you say, oh, I want more like this or more like that. There's lots of different strategies, everything from a technique I use is I try to paint with a brush a little bit bigger than I actually want to paint with. because that creates these really like lively, exciting brush strokes. And that's the sort of energy I'm looking for, is to have these exciting, bold, confident brush strokes. But I've also done photorealistic painting where I have a fan brush and I'm using little tiny brushes and things like that. So there's a real variety. So I would just, try to get like a standard set and then just kind of work out from there and, try different ones. I even have over in the corner there, I have a house painting brush, which is, you'll get some exciting strokes with that. And you can often do more than you might think. And you'll get some kind of exciting energy in there. So I don't know if you guys have any follow-ups to that.
Sounds right.
So let's see here. I'm going to do, so Deborah asks, do many artists use frames around canvas? Would you guys like to answer that?
It depends on the artist. I think if you take a survey through the galleries, maybe on the second or fourth floor, you'll see, lots of big paintings that are not framed, and then maybe smaller things behind glass that are framed. So I think artists may start off with putting their work out there unframed, but then collectors add frames to things, and dealers too, to make them look presentable in some time. So, but if you're an artist who incorporates the frame into your design, then that's also another way to go.
Yeah.
And then just to add to that, very often even artists choose not to frame their works, and we lend our work to another institution. We tend to frame them and glaze them for protection. So unless it's a retrospective of the artist and everything is unframed, we make exceptions. So yes, the frame is a way of protecting the art as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in my personal painting practice, I paint on birchwood panels and I keep the edges real clean because I think they look great just as they are. So it kind of serves as a frame, but a lot of people will buy my paintings and put a frame on it and looks great that way too. So I think it's subjective for the artist as well as for the buyer too.
Yeah.
So Tim asked, I recently followed the course on Postwar Abstract Painting led by Corey DeAugustine, which I enjoyed very much. I did the exercise on black painting in the manner of Ad Reinhardt. My question is, what treatment does one use in preserving and protecting the painting? With almost all of the oil taken out of the surface, it's very powdery.
A nightmare. Yeah, it's difficult to restore those.
Yeah, he describes the surface perfectly. That's a very matte surface. So even somebody just touching it lightly with a fingerprint can be something that's not possible to remove. So, and because they're so dark, we typically don't put them behind any kind of plexiglass or glass because of the reflections. And well, it's just, they need to be protected by keeping visitors at a distance as best as we can.
Yeah, gotcha. And there's nothing that says that art has to last forever, I suppose. I don't know how conservationists feel about that. That might be a challenging attitude for you guys to have to deal with, but.
Well, we have a painting here that's 100 years old. So you think about it differently, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, if the museum wants the painting to last forever, and then it's up to you guys to somehow figure that out, that could be put you in a tough spot. So Rosalinda asks, I am working in acrylics and would appreciate best ways to protect after dry and framing ideas to further the project. Perhaps do's and don'ts on the subject. So I think that's a question about any best practices for framing. If I understand that right?
Yeah, again, I use the highest quality archival materials you can. Typically, if you want to protect the edges, you can do it just with a thin strip frame, but you can also put a non-reflective plexi on it. That'll protect it even more. And always put something on the back to protect the back from vibration, because that can sometimes lead to the stretcher and the canvas hitting against each other, and cracking, things like that can result. So it's important to protect the back as well as the front.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And also the backing board protects it also from accidents, damages in hand when you handle it very often.
Gotcha. Joseph says, the one thing I like most about the course is that it provides technical details on how the painters worked. For example, it describes how Ad Reinhardt prepared paints. Unfortunately, the course can only reasonably cover 7 painters. Is there a way to easily find the kind of information about other painters, i.e. what mediums they used, what colors were in their palette, how did they prepare their surfaces, was there anything unusual about their techniques, etc. And it looks like we have a link that perhaps Sarah's going to add into the chat. That would be for the art news. Is that your link, Michael? You were talking about.
We chatted about that earlier. Just some of the resources we use are these articles that appeared in Art News that follow every step of an artist, practice from beginning to end, that are really helpful to know how things are put together. And then the Getty is sponsoring these books that are on single artists that are very in detail into the artist materials and techniques. So those are published about once a year, and there's been some by on de Kooning, Fontana. I think there's one coming out on Joan Mitchell, if I'm not mistaken. So they're doing these series. And then more and more, this kind of information is finding its way into exhibition catalogs, or even in exhibitions. If you come to see the Cézanne drawing and painting exhibition now on at MoMA, you'll see a little section of the gallery space devoted to descriptions of his materials and techniques. And sometimes this information doesn't make it in time for the publication deadline for the catalog, but it might end up on the wall of the exhibition or in the label copy.
I'll do a shameless marketing plug and say MoMA has an amazing new Cézanne drawing show up. So if you're able to make it, please come see the show. It's really great. Aldona missed he said, I didn't catch how to protect the back of the painting. Could you repeat? So that was all about putting something on the back to prevent vibrations, right? Is there anything like, does it need to be like archival quality, or in terms of the contact?
Ideally, it would be a very light corrugated archival board, but it could, something's better than nothing. And we have, original backing boards on Ad Reinhardt's, for instance, that are just made of regular corrugated cardboard that he inscribed his signature on, that we keep as part of the work, obviously. So, and they've survived. So
yeah.
But if you can afford archival, it's better. It's just going to last longer and be better in general for your work.
And then in terms of art conservation, Carol asks, all other things being equal, is light the most dangerous issue? And I would suspect there's so much, water.
Light is one, but then you have climate, you have climate control, you have to exhibit and store your paintings in an environment that is not super humid or super hot. So yeah, the environment plays a big role in.
Yeah. So I think we have time for one last question. I'm sorry, Michael, were you going to say anything?
No, that covers it, I'd say.
So Rachel asks, is it important for artists to use archival materials? Some mixed media artists use found objects and collage. Do you find this to be a problem for conservation?
I would say it's a challenge for conservators faced with materials used in unorthodox ways, put together in one work, but it actually is a good challenge. And we see it a lot in modern and contemporary art. So with good storage and climate control in the museum, we tend to be able to come up with a good solution, but we have a lot of more techniques at our disposal than we have in previous years. So, and getting to know the artist's attitude towards the materials is helpful as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much for spending the hour with us. I feel like it really just flew right by, and thank you for all your thoughtful questions. In the meantime, we would love to keep the conversation going, so please continue to share with us by posting in the discussion forum. And thank you so much. So I think with that, we'll conclude. Take care, everyone.